The latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. Many people look at Africa and ask why a continent with so much wealth remains poor. They look at the gold, the diamonds, the oil, and the fertile land, and they wonder where the money goes. They blame it all on local mismanagement or small-scale theft. But the truth is much bigger and much more dangerous. Today we are looking directly at the real machinery behind the looting of Africa. We are looking at how white-collar systems, international tax havens, and Western financial networks drain wealth out of the continent every single day. This is not a story of casual corruption. This is an organized international system designed to move wealth from the hands of African citizens into hidden bank accounts across the globe. Let's look directly at the hard data. Investigative economists have tracked the actual numbers, and what they found completely changes how we understand African debt and global finance. Between the years 1970 and 2008, a study of 33 sub-Saharan African countries revealed an incredible reality. During those decades, the net losses from illicit financial outflows from those 33 countries alone totaled a massive $944 billion. Let that number sink into your head. Nearly $1 trillion was drained out of just a part of the continent over less than 40 years. To understand how shocking this number is, we must compare it to what the world tells us about African poverty. The mainstream media always talk about African countries needing loans, aid, and financial support from Western institutions. They tell us that Africa owes the world. But let's look at the actual balance sheet from that exact same period. At the end of 2008, the combined external debt for those exact same 33 African countries was only $177 billion. Think about this math very carefully. The amount of money that was stolen and illegally pushed out of these countries was more than 5 times larger than the total amount of money they owe to foreign lenders. If that $994 billion stayed within the continent, these countries will not owe a single cent to any foreign bank or international fund.
Could describe it as a second empire. Britain's second empire, sort of hidden financial empire spanning large parts of the globe.
At the time of the British Empire, the City of London was the world's largest global financial centre. Not only Britain's colonies, but also independent countries did their banking in London and used the empire's currency for trade and financing. As the empire declined, so too did the City of London. The establishment of the London Euro Market enabled City of London banks to continue to exploit their empire-era networks and expertise, and the creation of secrecy jurisdictions gave banks access to large amounts of cheap money. International banks from across the globe set up branches in London and Britain's offshore jurisdictions in order to take advantage of this new system.
This system has taken the place of the occupation, up till 1962, for France, I don't know for England, but about the same time, England were physically present in India, for instance, or in other colonies. And when you look at the money flows through the tax havens, they are increasing when we withdraw from the colonies. We are still plundering developing countries as former colonial powers.
Wealthy individuals, organized crime, and corporations shifted their wealth offshore in exchange for secrecy and no tax. And as countries around the world began to deregulate and open their economies, it became ever easier to do so. Today, as much as half of all global offshore wealth may be hidden in Britain's secrecy jurisdictions. One of the losers is Africa, whose flight capital flows mostly into the modern British spider's web.
I think it's no coincidence that Britain's offshore empire emerged more or less at the same time as the collapse of the former empire. We tend to think of Africa as being a huge net debtor to the rest of the world. But that was the extent of their debts at the end of 2008, $177 billion.
The debt of sub-Saharan African nations stood at $177 billion in 2008. Yet the wealth these countries' elites had moved offshore between 1970 and 2008 is estimated at $944 billion, over 5 times their foreign debt.
$944 billion. Do the maths. Far from being a net debtor, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is a net creditor to the rest of the world.
As capital moved offshore, African nations borrowed money from international banks at high interest. Over time, these debts became so great that they may never be repaid. Secrecy jurisdictions were starving developing nations of their wealth and their tax revenues.
For a long time, a lot of developing countries, including recently Ecuador, have been trying to set up a UN tax body which is of a higher value than what is currently there, which is the UN Tax Committee. And every time this has happened, it has gotten blocked. During the financing for development process in Addis Ababa last year, I think it was the UK and the US that blocked attempts again to set up this World Tax Organization. So why would they not want to have democratic decision-making in global decisions on how tax gets collected across borders? I don't understand this. As long as we have cross-border activity that involves both criminal and legal activity, as long as we're unable to separate the two, this is going to continue to be a problem.
Western nations block attempts to provide greater transparency of international financial flows and the implementation of global standards for the collection of tax across borders, whilst elites in developing nations use offshore centres to hide their wealth offshore.
The oil from Gabon has not benefited people in Gabon. And this is true for the copper in Zambia, for the gold in Mozambique or in Mali. They have benefited the company that do extract it and their shareholders. It has benefited the corrupt elite in the country.
In developing countries, the offshore system of tax havens has facilitated the looting of these countries by their elites. It has enabled them to steal the money and keep it safe somewhere else.
Illicit financial flows, because the anonymity that drives them creates incentives for people in positions of power to be corrupt. This is why there's a group of countries where development progress is so difficult. It's that the incentives of individuals and the ability to pursue them through all the mechanisms that underpin illicit flows outweigh the type of mechanisms that lead you to a powerful, representative, effective state that can start to deliver development.
Worldwide, developing countries lose over $1 trillion every year in capital flight and tax evasion. Most of this wealth flows into large Western nations, like the United States and Britain, and enables their currencies to stay strong, whilst developing nations' currencies remain weak. But illicit flows into Western nations also had another unexpected side effect. The economies of the United States and Britain began to financialize. The origins of this financialization, or de-industrialization, go back to the 1960s.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. President Johnson, meanwhile, let it be known that the FBI is...
In fact, Africa will be a massive net lender to the rest of the world. The continent is not poor because it lacks wealth. The continent is poor because its wealth is systematically extracted. Africa is actually a net creditor to the rest of the world, but that credit is held in secret places by thieves and multinational corporations. So how does this looting actually work on a practical level? It does not happen with sacks of cash moving across borders in the middle of the night. It happens through clean offices, expensive lawyers, and complicated accounting systems. This is what experts call white-collar looting. The biggest driver of this capital flight is not even corrupt politicians. The biggest driver is multinational corporations that operate in the oil, mining, and agricultural sectors. These companies use a method called trade misinvoicing to hide their true profits and avoid paying taxes to African governments. Trade misinvoicing is a very simple trick hidden behind complex paperwork. When a multinational corporation extracts oil or gold from an African country, they must report the value of that resources to the local customs office. To avoid paying the correct royalties and taxes, the company will purposely understate the value of what they are exporting. For example, they might export $10 million worth of gold, but write down on the official invoice that the gold is only worth $2 million. The remaining $8 million of value disappears from the African country's books completely. Where does that hidden value go? The company routes the paperwork through a secondary company they owe inside a tax haven or a secrecy jurisdiction. This secondary company re-invoices the product at its true value of $10 million before selling it to the final buyer. The $8 million in pure profit lands safely in a bank account where no taxes are collected, while the African countries get paid tax on only $2 million. This happens thousands of times a day across every single resource sector on the continent. The scale of this operation requires a massive global infrastructure. Money cannot just disappear into thin air. It needs a destination. This is where the secrecy jurisdiction and Western financial centers come into the picture. Places like the Cayman Islands, Jersey, Switzerland, and even the city of London itself act as giant vacuum cleaners for African wealth. These jurisdictions have laws specifically designed to hide the true owners of companies and bank accounts. They offer absolute anonymity. When an African leader or a foreign corporation wants to move stolen wealth out of the continent, they set up an anonymous shell company in one of these tax havens. A shell company exists only on paper. It has no employees, no real office, and no actual business operations. Its only purpose is to hold a bank account because the tax havens refuses to share information with foreign governments. The local tax authorities in Ghana, Nigeria, or Kenya cannot see who actually owns the money. The trail goes completely cold. This system creates a terrible cycle of corruption that destroys local economies from the inside out. When multinational corporations and Western financial institutions offer these secret channels, they actively encourage local leaders to participate in the looting. A corrupt official does not steal money just to keep it under their mattress. They steal it because they know they can safely invest it in luxury real estate in Europe, buy expensive stocks in America, or hide it in a Swift bank account. The Western financial system provides the safety and the incentive for this corruption to grow, according to the explanation that was given by this analyst. The impact on ordinary citizens is devastating. Every dollar that leaves an African country through illicit capital flight is a dollar that cannot be spent on vital public services. It means hospitals do not have life-saving medicines. It means schools do not have proper textbooks or qualified teachers. It means roads are left broken and electricity networks are never built. The people of Africa pay for this white-collar looting with their own lives and their future opportunities, while the wealth they produce both skyscrapers and funds pension funds in distant nations. Legal experts from across Africa, including professors at the University of Nairobi, have pointed out that this structure is protected by international law and global political power. The rules of global trade and finance were not written by Africans. They were written by the very nations that benefit from the inflow of this hidden capital. When Western governments talk about helping Africans fight corruption, they focus entirely on the domestic side of the problem. They talk about local police, local courts, and local bribes. But they completely ignore the supply side of the problem. They never shut down the tax havens. They never penalize their own banks for accepting billions of dollars in unexplained wealth. They leave the back door wide open because their own economies depend on that steady stream of stolen money. To break this chain, we must understand that the fight for true African independence is no longer just about political control or national flags. True independence is an economic battle against global financial systems. It requires African nations to build strong, independent monitoring tools to watch every single resource that leaves their shores. It requires deep cooperation across regional alliances to force multinational companies to open their books and show exactly where their profits are made. The data proves that Africa does not need to beg for development aid. The continent generates more than enough wealth to fund its own development, its own infrastructure, and its own future. The problem is not a lack of resources. The problem is an international network of white-collar looters, secret tax havens, and complicit financial systems that keep the continent financially bleeding. We must look past the stories we are told by global lenders and see the reality of the balance sheet. Africa is the creditor. The rest of the world is the debtor. It is time to stop the bleeding and protect African wealth for African people. Please, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall, and united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world and in Europe.